Now going live. I get a message that we are now being set up for the meeting YouTube live. I'm checking on. Now going live. I get a message that we are now being set up for the meeting YouTube live. And that's the delay. I'm checking on. I don't know if you can hear that, but that's the delay. So let me just say, and excuse me a moment, I will say to everyone, I don't know, I'm going to be hearing myself, so I need to mute that. Something to learn. Let me just say, and excuse me a moment, I will say to everyone, I don't know, I'm going to be hearing myself, so I need to mute that. Okay. All right. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Denise McCormick. I'm the president of the Patchwork Storytelling Guild, and we are absolutely delighted to be celebrating World Storytelling Day with you. For your convenience, we are being streamed live on YouTube as well as our website, and we hope that you enjoy the stories. To get us started, I would like to introduce to you Mr. Larry Johnson, who was one of the foundational setters of and bringers of World Storytelling Day. He is a veteran, an educator, a grandfather, and an author. He lives to assert that stories have value and to listen to the stories of others for the myriad healing possibilities that they offer. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Mr. Larry Johnson.
Thank you, Denise. And I'm going to just start by saying that this is sad news. In January of this year, my friend Ulf Arnström, the Swedish child psychologist turned storyteller, who he would tell you that he didn't do this, but he was the leader of the band in Scandinavia that really got World Storytelling Day going. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that before I end, but every year since 2003, there have been events all over the world on or around March 20th, and there's always a theme. This year, the theme is lost and found. And when I first saw that theme come up, I immediately thought, I know about this, but I don't know any of the stories. There's many, many folk tales around the world about a lost ring that shows up when a fish is cut open for dinner. And I was going to learn to tell one of the stories, but I went instead to my mother, who was very Swedish, never met Ulf, and was always kind of hesitant about the idea of storytelling. But she went to a reunion of her nursing class at Swedish Hospital. And I was born in Swedish Hospital and took coffee intravenously the second day. But my mom came home from this reunion, maybe 40 years, and she was all excited. One of her classmates had told her this story. She said, I was at a flea market, and my husband, I'm looking at the jewelry, and my husband is just, can't we get going? I'm hungry. And I said, I want to look at this jewelry. And he said, don't you have enough jewelry? And I finally settled on this ring that I really liked. And the stone was a little loose, but I thought it was worth paying $5 for it. And so I bought it. And then he said, $5 for that? The stone is loose. And I said, I know, but I can get it fixed. So I went home and I took it to the jeweler. And he looked at it through that thing they look through, and he looked up and he said, "I'll give you $1,000 for that ring." And I thought, boy, if he's going to do that just like that, I better check into this. So I checked around several different places. Turns out that my $5 ring was a known part of the known part lost from the jewelry collection of Josephine Bonaparte. And I don't remember the exact figure, but the ring, I don't. Uh, she did when she was telling it. The ring sold for something like $500,000. And that's the way it was then. Let me just tell you a little bit about uh, Ulf. I won't tell you how this came to be, but Elaine and I organized a number of events for Ulf Arnstrom to do here in Minneapolis in the Twin Cities in 1994. And he just delighted everybody, every place he went. He did a performance at the Seward Cafe where we had storytelling for adults every Friday night for 13 years. And he did a workshop on Norse mythology. And a thing I remember him saying, he said, I've been studying the Vikings. And I found out they're not as bad as we thought they were. But I also found out they're a whole lot worse than we knew they were. And then when I took him to the airport, it was early in the morning, and nothing was open, and he wanted a cup of coffee. And so I took him to a vending machine and bought him a cup of coffee. And he said just before he got on the plane, "Oh, good. The people back home would be so disappointed if they knew that I came to your airport and there was no opportunity to purchase." That's Ulf. The next year, he invited Elaine and I. Actually, we were in Scandinavia 2 times to teach the Scandinavian storytellers to work on personal experience stories. And we've been able to go a lot of places, but this was the only time it was always nice to go someplace and then come back home. But this was the only time that I felt like, and I think Elaine felt the same, that we could call home, say, sell the house and send me the money. We're staying here. And so that wonderful experience in Scandinavia, and at that time, in 1995, they had started a thing called Alla Berättardag, Everybody Tell a Story Day. And it was kind of an encouragement for people. It's great if you're a professional storyteller or a performer, but everybody has stories to tell and everybody should do that. And that was the thrust of the day. So we brought that back home and we promoted it everywhere that we could, every storytelling newsletter. And then in 2003, Ulf announced that he'd been looking into this and he found out that Mexico was doing something similar on March 20th. Alla Berättardag was March 21st, and he had found different things like that going on. So he organized a group of storytellers around the world and started what we now call World Storytelling Day. And I don't remember if anybody said it straight out at the time, but the inherent thrust of the beginning of that was, and I've used it all the time when we do things here, if I can hear your story, it's harder for me to hate you. And when I was thinking about this the other day, and I'll just end this little introduction with this, I remembered in the vein of that, during the nuclear freeze here in the States in the 80s, and so relevant to today, there was a song that made the rounds all over the world. It was written by a little girl in Russia, and I'd forgotten about it. It just came up again the other day, and I, it'd be great to have a recording of a great singer plugged right in to the sound system, but you're going to have to go with a campfire song leader. It goes like this. May there always be sunshine. May there always be blue skies. May there always be mama. May there always be me. And there's as many verses as people in the group want to plug in. May there always be mama. May there always be papa. May there always be storytellers. May there always be peace on earth someday. Thank you.
Larry, thank you so much. See, now I couldn't have introduced you better than you shared the story of how you became involved in all of this. And I'm so glad that you're here with us today. And I love the song, and I am going to figure out chords to it and get back to you. All right. Okay, so next, for your listening pleasure, everyone out there and everyone here with us now, I would like to introduce Susanna Brody. Susanna is a retired support teacher. She is a researcher. She is a character actor who talks about Chester County and brings to life those aspects of history that sometimes fall through the cracks. She's been a storyteller for at least 30 years, and she has a wonderful way with words. And so I'd like to introduce to you now Susanna Brody.
Thank you, Denise. Okay. The story I'm going to share with you today is actually an old Irish tale, but I first came across it more than 30 years ago in a picture book called Clever Tom and the Leprechaun, written and illustrated by Linda Shute. Tom was out taking a walk along the country roads. He enjoyed this on a daily basis. He was a farmer, but he was not a very good farmer. He preferred to stroll around the countryside, listening to the sounds of nature. And as he walked along this road, he heard a sound he'd never heard before. It was a gentle tap, tap, tapping. He moved over to the hedgerow and took a look over. And what did he see but a wee little man tapping with a little hammer on a tiny pointed shoe? Tom thought, "'Tis a leprechaun." He moved around the bush. He tipped his hat in greeting and said, "Greetings. Pleasure on your work." The leprechaun thanked him and kept on tapping. And Tom said, "'Tis a shame to be working so hard on such a beautiful day." The leprechaun frowned and said, "It's no business of yours if I'm enjoying doing my work. You should be looking at your cows. They're in your cornfield right now." Well, Tom thought. He almost looked away, but he was more clever than that. Instead, he moved closer to the leprechaun and he put out his left hand and he captured that leprechaun before he could get away. And he said, "I've got you now. You're going to have to show me where your treasure is hidden." Well, the leprechaun squirmed and tried to get out of his grip, but he wasn't able to do it. And finally he gave up and he said, "Oh, Tom, You're too clever for me. I guess I'll have to show you where I've buried my treasure. And with that, he led Tom all over the countryside. They went over hills and down through valleys. They went under a bridge and through a bog, and they wandered all through the countryside on roads that even Tom had never strolled on. And finally, he pulled up along a field. It was a field filled with beautiful wildflowers. And the leprechaun looked at Tom and said, "Me treasures in that very field." Well, Tom didn't have enough of that. He said, "You have to show me exactly where it is." So they entered the field of wildflowers and they roamed through and meandered here and there, following a path that only the leprechaun knew. And finally, the leprechaun stopped and he pointed to a certain plant. It happened to be a plant that we call in this country ragwort. And of course, we consider it a weed. But when it blooms, it has a beautiful, yellow, lacy flower. The leprechaun said, "Me treasure's buried under that very plant." Well, Tom thought, this is great. All I have to do is run back home and get my spade and dig it up. But then he realized, how would he know which plant to dig up? For it was a field of these beautiful flowers. But Tom thought, he's clever. He pulled his kerchief out of his pocket and he very carefully, still holding on to the leprechaun, tied the kerchief around the stem of that plant. And the leprechaun said, "Well, now that I've showed you where my treasure is buried, will you be letting me go, please?" And Tom looked at the leprechaun and he said, well, he didn't want to go back and get his spade and have the leprechaun remove that kerchief from that plant. No, sir. So he said to the leprechaun, "You must promise you'll not touch my kerchief." And the leprechaun smiled and said, "'Tis an easy promise to make, Tom. I'll not lay a finger on that kerchief of yours tied around that plant." And so, although Tom knew that leprechauns were very tricky, he also knew that they never broke a promise. So he opened his hand to let the leprechaun go. And he tipped his hat and said, "Thank you very much." And the leprechaun looked at him and said, "I hope you'll find some good out of what you find there, Tom." And with that, he disappeared. Well, Tom hurried back to his farm. Of course, he had a long way to go. He had to go out of the field and he had to go back through that bog, under the bridge and over the hills and down in the valleys. And he got home to his farm and he grabbed his spade and he ran back to that field as fast as he could. And when he got there with his spade, he looked at the field of wildflowers, beautiful wildflowers. And on every single plant was tied a kerchief, just like Tom's. Well, he wandered into the field and he meandered back and thought he found what looked like his kerchief in the location that he thought the leprechaun had taken him. And he dug up that plant. There was no treasure under that plant. And he dug up another one nearby, and he dug through the afternoon and into the evening. But as the sun was slowly setting in the western sky, Tom realized he had been fooled by that leprechaun, and he was not going to have his fortune made on that day. Well, Tom lived a good long life. He was still a pretty lazy farmer, and he preferred to stroll around the countryside. And maybe he did get some good out of what he found there, because wherever he went, he told the story about the day he caught a leprechaun and almost had his fortune made. And he continued to stroll through the countryside, listening for that tap, tap, tapping, which of course he never heard, but he never traveled anywhere after that without taking along his trusty spade.
Thank you so much, Susie. That was a wonderful story. And until now, I never realized that was a story about the value of stories, because it doesn't matter how much muck and trouble we get into, as long as there's a good story that comes out of it. It seems like eventually it's worth the trouble. So thank you for that wonderful story. Our next storyteller is Suzanne Burchell. Suzanne's a member of the Burlington Storytellers Guild in Ontario, Canada. She comes to us today with a background in script writing, short story writing, education, and a plethora of other things that feed into the craft of storytelling. So without further ado, here is Suzanne Burchell.
Thank you, Denise. Very nice to be here. I'm going to tell you a story that I wrote. It's part of my collection called Almost a Dozen Tales by the Lighthouse Keeper's Granddaughter. I am from Nova Scotia, which is a province near the Atlantic Ocean. All of my stories have a little touch of the Maritimes, because that's very much the root of all my stories. This story is actually called Lost and Found. Dilapidated, ramshackle, falling apart, and disintegrating. Those words describe the house as well as the owner. The two of them were on the same track, falling apart. The owner, Miss Nancy, used to be a town looker. She could sashay through town in her clothes from Montreal, her perfectly coiffed hair, her imported fancy shoes, and she could turn heads from one end of town to the other, and didn't she know it? Furthermore, the house was the envy of everyone in the town. It was pristine and very she. Somehow, things had changed. Miss Nancy no longer turned heads. Sadly, Miss Nancy never went downtown anymore. She had become more and more reclusive. She had started to let herself go. She found that she was at a time in her life where she was so very lost. What had happened to her? There had been so many suitors. There had been so many parties, and now no suitors, no parties, and hardly a friend ever called. Miss Nancy lived in this house that had grown so very shabby. She shuffled around the house in mule slippers that were worn out. She wore nothing but an old threadbare muumuu. It was shapeless, it was shiftless. She'd let her hair go. She'd let everything go. She knew that she had, because not too long ago, she'd been at the Co-op supermarket. Her friend Laura came by. She said, "Hello, Laura." And Laura said, "Do I know you?" That's how far gone Miss Nancy was. On that very day, she came home, opened her front door, and removed a mirror from the wall. That mirror she had used as long as she could remember to check to see that she was perfection. But when she looked now, she couldn't bear to see what she saw. Down came the mirror. She left a long black nail and the faded outline of where the mirror had been. Some days passed. November came, wet, rainy. A knock came on the door. She went to the door, opened it a little, and said, "Who are you? Please let me in." The young man was very handsome. and he looked familiar to her. She agreed. He followed her into the living room. He sat on a saggy sofa. She sat in the out-of-date wingback. There was silence. He spoke first. I think you're my mother. No, I'm not your mother, but my sister might be your mother. I'm putting two and two together. Seems to me my sister went out west when she was in grade 13. That's what girls did back then when they were pregnant. They went out west. Well, suppose that you're the result. Suppose I am, said the young man. More silence. Again, he spoke. If you be my aunt, then I'm asking you if you might donate a kidney to me. You see, I am dying if I don't get a kidney. Miss Nancy said, yes, I suppose I could. My sister's been dead a long time. More silence. She took a breath in and said, let's do it. A year passed, a year to the day, another November. She ran her hand gently over the scar where this kidney had been. And at that very moment, there came another knock on the door. She opened it, and there, another handsome young man who looked vaguely familiar. Come in, she said. They sat in the living room. This time, he sat on a new sofa, and she sat in a very stylish wingback. There had been some changes. Silence. She looked at him. He looked familiar. He spoke. You are my Aunt Nancy. I tracked down my brother Robert, who you've met. He is my twin. We were both given away. I'm pretty desperate. You see, I'm going blind and I need an eye. She took a deep breath in. Let's do it, she said. Another year passed. This time, she was learning to walk around on her fancy new high-heeled shoes, and she had gotten used to looking in the mirror with one eye. And as she walked around, she was smiling to herself. That terrible feeling of being so lost and possibly so hopeless had long since gone. Robert and his twin brother, Andrew, came to see her every Sunday. This was Sunday. They had helped her paint the house, buy new furniture, a 55-inch television. She had now resorted back to her old self. Perfect hair, perfect clothes, perfect everything. And she even began sashaying downtown again. She waited for the knock on the door for the boys. A knock came, she opened the door. Not the boys, but a third stranger. Whoa, triplets. You suppose my sister had triplets? She thought that to herself. The stranger said, may I come in? Oh, yes. Very proudly, she sashayed into her living room. Have a seat. Thank you, said the stranger. Miss Nancy said, I'll get right to it. Have you come from a part of me? There's not a lot of parts left. The stranger softly said, I have come for all of you. You see, Miss Nancy, there's a fellow way up there, way up there, if you know what I mean. And that fella has been seeing all the good you've been doing. So, Miss Nancy, I've come for all of you. Thought Miss Nancy. She stopped for a moment. She took a deep breath and then she said, let's do it. A week later, the twins, Robert and Andrew, stood by the seashore. It was Miss Nancy's wishes that her ashes be scattered on an outgoing tide. The boys both held tight onto the urn. Robert spoke out loud, Aunt Nancy, I just can't let you go. Me neither, said Andrew. There was only the sound of the lapping waves as the tide was trying to recede. Silence, followed by a voice that all who were present remembered. It was the voice of Miss Nancy. "All right, boys," she said. "You know my wishes. Now let's do it." And that is the story of a woman who was lost and found.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. That was a lovely story, and I'm so glad that you shared it with us tonight. And now we are going to move on to William Bill Carr. He is an educator. He works with youth, both teens and young adults. And he is here today to do something a little bit different, and that is to present us with a spoken word performance. So I'd like to introduce to you Bill Carr. Oh, one other thing, if anyone is looking for this, the live stream is now on the website channel as well. Again, this is a new experience that we're all delving into, and so if anyone wanted to take a peek there, it's up. All right, once again, I'd like to introduce to everyone William Carr, a spoken word artist, and here he is with an original poem.
Thank you so much. So I just want to explain a few things before I launch into this. First of all, I'm part Choctaw Indian, Native American. I lived for several years on the reservation where I had a few visions, you might say, which I tried to share with people, and they didn't necessarily believe that what I had seen or what I was communicating with them. So I decided, well, I'll just write about what occurred, in my way. Now I have to explain something because people say, well, what is that? Is it poetry? Is it prose? What are you doing? Well, it's a real mixture because it's sort of like my painting. It's both realistic and abstract. Some people call it neo-mod. Some people say this is storytelling. Some people say it's poetic. I say it's a little bit of both because it's me. And that's who I am, and that's what I lived. Lots of different cultural backgrounds, and I want to share that with you before I start, so you sort of get a feel for me. I have lived among French people. My mother's French. I've lived around Indians, Native Americans, I'm speaking of. I've lived around African Americans. I've lived along Caucasians, both lower level and higher level. So I lived around ESL people and EFL people, meaning English as a second language kind of people. So I have sort of a touch of everything in my blood. Okay, so this is called The Earth Smell. Oh my God. Oh, what is that? What? Over there, over there, just above the mountain. What is that? Over there. Oh my God. Is it real? Is it my imagination? What is it? Is it coming from my eyes? Is it coming from my ears? Is it falling from my mouth? Is it part of my taste buds? What is that? Over there. What is that? I don't know. Is it real? Is it not real? What is it? Say it smells like the earth. say she smells like the earth. At the times of the passing moon, just above my head. What was that? Did it move? What was that? Was that? What did I see? Hey, it smells like the earth at all times of the passing moon. My eyes tell me that she walks about. My eyes tell me that she's moving about. Pushing against the wind's crying warning. Say it's a pushing warning cry. Winds against push. She's pushing against the wind's crying warning. What was that? Did it move? Could I feel it? Could I smell it? It was pushing against the wind's crying warning. With that fresh earth smell. Can you smell it? I do. Can you see it? I do. Can we reach out and touch it? I can. Yet it's depositing something wherever it goes. It's on my arm, it's on my arm, it's on my arm. I can feel it on my stomach, on my stomach, on my stomach. No, it's on my face, on my face, on my face. No, it's on my leg, on my leg, on my leg. It's every place on planet Earth. What's that? Did it move? What was that? Hey, look, what's that? It smells in beautiful Chanel number 19. Let me take a breath and calm. Let me take in more air and settle down. Let me get my eyes focused and bring it back down to the calm. Because I can feel that 6 a.m. yawn in my breath. A deep inhaling like I'm in Africa. And a deep exhaling like I'm walking through Europe. Because I can see it before my eyes. It's full of air and rising above that mountain, filling my lungs and filling my lungs. My lungs are full of water. My throat is full of air because I can see it over there. Full of the land under my feet. I can feel it. It's real. Ain't it? Isn't it? Mustn't it be? Could it be? Maybe it's just a whirling air or spinning water. Or maybe it's just a trampling of something I ate. Or maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just virgin ocean tides hitting old Rock of Ages. Say the Rock of Ages, Rock of Ages, yeah. Say it's the Rock of Ages, High pressure centers bouncing off low, perhaps. Wait a minute, what was that? That is something over there. It's not just dirt careening off boulders. It's something, I see it. Oh, maybe in time, I can convince people I saw it. And everybody will see it, mountain down, from the top highest hills to the lowest part of the earth, to spread its smell amongst all of us. So upon the earth, we can feel it. Upon the earth, we can see it. Upon the earth, we can reach out and touch it. And when we touch it, her soulful droplets will spread peace and joy. Drop from the nose like a falling rain to the ground, to be absorbed by us all. Feel it in your soul, on the soil and soul, on the soul and soil. Only the earth pounds will object to the vision. Only the earth hound will run away from her. I can see her. There she is. There it is. The breath more heavily now. The moon reached more full cycle. The dogs have run away, and she smiles upon me, waving as she rises. Jetting from the earth, blazing from the solar system, blotting away all the hate and misery and non-belief, leaving us all behind to smile at her, to see her, to touch her, to know.
Bill, thank you so much. It's very different to read a poem or a work than to hear it performed. And I've got this big smile on my face. So thank you so much for bringing that and sharing that with us. And now I would like to introduce to everyone Patricia R. Coffey, and she is a wonderful storyteller. Tonight, she is also going to be eliciting smells in our imagination with the smell of butter cookies. And so, Pat, I turn the podium over to you.
Thank you. When that cat came to live with us, it would barely fill 2 cupped hands. But that little cat was very good at 2 things. One of them was eating, and the other was growing. The cat came to Chris at Halloween, and it was the color of pumpkins. And so Chris named that cat Spooky. Spooky loved Chris. The cat had the run of the place until Christmas. By Christmas, Spooky was big enough it could climb the Christmas tree, knock the ornaments down so that Dan's little puppy could try to eat them. We had to fence the Christmas tree. The cat continued to grow and grow. And at the supper table, it loved to crawl up and sit in the seat of a chair that was pushed in, where Chris would give it little bites to eat. Finally, I had to say, that's it. The cat stays in the basement while we're eating. Time moved along, and I found myself one weekend trying to do the 2 things that I ordinarily do on a weekend: the laundry and bake or cook something for us to enjoy in the following week. It was Saturday morning. I started the laundry. The washer and dryer were in the basement. Before I went down, I took 2 sticks of butter and I put them in the butter dish and put them on the table so they would soften. Now, supposedly, Chris had taught the cat not to get on the table and not to get on the counter, but you know that cat didn't always mind. So I went downstairs. I wanted the butter soft to mix into those butter cookies. I didn't want it soupy. We didn't have a microwave. So this was going to work. I put all the ingredients there in that butter, and then I went down and did the laundry, and I brought it back up, and I went out to the kitchen to see how things were going. That cat had been up on the table, had licked the butter up one side and down the other. And I had to throw the butter away. the opportunity for butter cookies that week was lost because I cannot put cat spit in the cookies. So the next Saturday, I thought I had things figured out. I was still doing the laundry, but I had all the clothes upstairs to fold and put away. So I didn't have to keep opening the door, and I put the cat in the basement. I put the butter out to soften. I went to work putting clothes away, and I thought I would catch Chris when he came home before he let the cat out. But I was wrong. I heard Chris come in. I continued to fold clothes and put them away. And then I told Chris what I was trying to do, and he said, but that's the first thing I did was let the cat out. And so I rushed out to the kitchen, and once again, that cat had licked the butter up one side and down the other. The opportunity for butter cookies that week was again lost as I threw the butter away because I can't put cat spit in the cookies. Now, I did a lot of thinking that next week, and I got out my grandmother's cut glass, heavy weighted butter dish with the heavy top. And this time on Saturday, I broke the butter sticks up and I put them in that heavy glass dish. And I put that on the table and I went about doing the laundry while the butter softened. And I thought the cat will never be able to get that lid off. But while I was working in the back bedroom, putting Dan's things away, I heard a little scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch, and then bam. And I ran out to the kitchen, and sure enough, that cat had been nudging that butter dish right off the table. And the cat and I looked across the kitchen and saw the dish was not broken, but the cat had licked that butter up one side and down the other. I was going to have to throw that butter away again because I cannot put cat spit in the cookies. As I picked up the dish parts, I got to thinking, maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. Maybe the cat was trying to tell me something. Maybe the cat really needed that butter. So I cut off a chunk, put it on a fresh saucer, and slid it over to the cat. The cat stuck his nose up in the air and stalked out of the kitchen as if to say, now what kind of fun would that be? But it did get me thinking. And so I called the vet. And when I told him what I was using for cat food, he said, oh my gosh, she might as well be feeding sawdust. It's a good thing you bake cookies often enough for that cat to get a little something else to eat. I changed cat food, and it seemed we'd solved the problem because I could make cookies now and the cat remained happy. But just in case, I made a sign and put it on the basement door. It said, cookies, yes, cat, no. And I put it up whenever I made cookies. Now, it seemed like this was just a story about outsmarting the cat, and you know how hopeless that is. But it's really about all those lost opportunities for butter cookies and having found the way to make everyone, including the cat, happy and healthy. It's the story of the cat we began to call the butter cat.
Denise, you need to unmute.
Yes, I've had very many windows open here to finagle back and forth. So I apologize. It took me just a minute to find the button to do that. That was a wonderful story, Pat. Just absolutely wonderful. I think that you filled us with some joy. Our next storyteller is Jim Cassane, who hails from Florida and who has been sharing with us a lot of personal and interesting memoir over the last couple of months. And so I am absolutely delighted to introduce him so that he can wow us again. Jim?
Thank you, Denise. I'm going to share with you a story that I heard from my mother 60 years ago that she heard from her pastor when she was a child. As the sun was setting in late February 1910, a small black locomotive belching a huge tower of white smoke was clawing its way across the ribbon of frozen steel rails in a blinding late season blizzard, pulling 5 dimly lit passenger cars behind it. In the third car of that train sat an attractive young lady who cradled in her arms a tiny infant. She had traveled across several states, and you could see the stress and exhaustion showing on her pretty face. At the last station stop, a dapper young man in his mid-20s, wearing a tailored 3-piece herringbone suit and a bowler hat, got aboard the train. And he came up to her seat and asked if he could sit by her. And the lady looked at him and reluctantly agreed. His initial attempts at beginning a conversation with the young lady failed. Still, he thought to himself, there must be something I can say to this woman to cheer her up. Now, what this young man named Curtis could not have possibly known was the fear this recently widowed young lady was carrying with her, pondering taking a major step into the unknown. Now, Roger, the train conductor, had been keeping a watchful eye over the woman and infant since he had first validated her ticket as she boarded the train at a large Midwestern city, 2 states, in several hours earlier. She carried with her a small traveling bag, and in that bag was a letter of invitation from her late husband's elderly aunt and uncle, whom she had never met. The letter said, "Come live with us." And the lady pondered what life would be like in a tiny hamlet located nestled away in the western Pennsylvania mountains. The instructions in the letter contained a train ticket and how to get to their location. Now, this little hamlet was what was called on the railroad a flag stop, a station where the train ordinarily would not stop unless there was a passenger to pick up or to let off. And as the night wore on, Roger, the conductor, would walk through each car back and forth, announcing the name of the next upcoming station stop. And with each trip through the third car, she reached out and pleaded with the conductor, "If I doze off, you won't forget me, will you?" "No, madam, I will see that you get off all right. We are still on time and scheduled to reach your stop at 3:10 a.m. The conductor noted as he passed through the car that the young couple had just begun a conversation, and it appeared to have begun slowly, with Curtis and Clara, the young mother, exchanging light pleasantries. Then Curtis boldly reached over, touched her arm lightly, and as Roger walked away, whispered, "Miss, don't worry. I will see that you get off at your stop." Her slender face loosened up as she heard those words, and her lips relaxed into a warm smile. The couple then began to exchange bits of information about themselves. The woman was educated and admitted she loved the works of William Shakespeare and was particularly fond of his play, All's Well That Ends Well. In fact, she admitted, in trying times like these, she repeated to herself her favorite line from the play: love all, trust a few, do wrong to none. Now, the time was 3 a.m., and the young couple were just about to exchange information so they could begin to write to each other as they felt the train begin to slow down, and then it came to a complete stop. And in an effort to be chivalrous, Curtis stood up, extended his hand to the young lady. "I believe we've arrived at your station, miss. May I help you get off the train?" And he felt the smile of Clara as she looked up at him and the warmth. And she got up and accompanied Curtis to the rear of the car, down the platform steps into the foot-deep snow. The bitter cold instantly struck her face as she stared into the black abyss, the blinding snow of that storm, trying to get her bearings. And she pulled her coat and her infant even closer and wrapped the blanket tighter around its tiny head. And then, with a shudder that shook all the cars, the train once again began to pull ahead. And Curtis stood in the vestibule of the car, watching the mother and infant disappear into the blinding snow. Returning to his seat, Curtis closed his eyes and he breathed in the remnants of the sweet lavender scent that Claire had been wearing. But a few minutes later, the train once again began to slow and then came to a complete stop. Roger, the conductor, came walking through the train, announcing the arrival at the Hamlet flag stop. And when he got to the seat, he abruptly stopped and stiffened. "Where did the lady with the baby go?" "Well, she got off at the last stop," replied Curtis, who had just helped her off the train. Roger stopped cold, stared with huge, wide open eyes, frozen as if he was in total paralysis at that moment. "She has gone to her death then, for that was not a station. We only stopped the train to fix something on the engine." He immediately signaled to the engineer, and the crew started to back up the train while the trainmen on board went through each car, soliciting volunteers to help for the search. And when the train reached the approximate location where the woman had departed the train, everybody disembarked and started to search for her. The unrelenting snowfall and blowing wind had just in a short amount of time completely obliterated any trace that might enable the searchers to tell what direction the young woman had gone. And they searched for quite a long time. And at last they found her, huddled beneath the branches of an evergreen tree, frozen, covered with ice and snow, her little lifeless babe clutched close to her heart. Now, it might appear that the glowing ember of love had forever gone out, but it did not. The legacy of that fateful night lived on in the hearts and lives of all who had witnessed it. Roger, the conductor, never forgot how a person making an honest mistake could result in such tragic consequences. And he mourned every day the beginnings of what seemed to look like such a promising relationship all because of a companion's compassion and offer of assistance. And you see, Claire herself had forgotten the beginning of that lesson from Shakespeare that said, love all, trust a few. And Curtis, her fellow traveler, who had only sought to help her, ended up carrying the heavy burden of what had happened that fateful night and lived out the remaining days of his life haunted by the first and third parts of that lesson. Love all, do wrong to none. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim, for sharing that. That's quite a memorable story, and you told it so well. It is haunting. Our next storyteller is Lisbeth Pulowski, and she, like many of us, was bitten by the story bug when she was just a little girl and found the magic and enchantment of stories. And she is going to share with us a folktale. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Lisbeth Pulowski.
A long time ago in China, there was a young boy named Ping. Ping could grow anything. He loved to grow flowers, most of all. Anything he planted burst into bloom. Flowers, bushes, even big fruit trees. Everyone in the country loved flowers. They all planted them, and the air smelled like perfume. Even the emperor had a garden that he tended himself. He loved birds and animals, but he loved the flowers most of all. The emperor was old, though, and he needed to choose a successor. He had no children of his own. So how should he choose? He decided to let the flowers help him choose his successor. The next day, a proclamation was issued. All the children in the land were to come to the palace and be given special flower seeds by the emperor. There was great excitement as every child put on their best clothes and flocked to the palace. All of the parents wanted their children to be chosen emperor, and all of the children wanted to be chosen as well. The emperor gave each child a special flower seed. And he said, "Show me your best in a year's time. He or she who shows me their best in a year's time will be granted my kingdom and the title of emperor." When Ping received his seed from the emperor, he was the happiest child of all. He ran home, got his best pot, placed rich black soil in it, and carefully placed the seed in. He watered it and tended it every day, but nothing grew. Several days passed, and then weeks. He moved the plant, made sure that it got the right sunlight, and still nothing sprouted or grew. 2 months went by, and Ping was starting to get worried. He took a bigger pot and put in it fresh, rich black soil and carefully transplanted the seed into the bigger pot. And he watered it and tended it and waited for a sprout to come up. But nothing happened. Months and months went by, and soon a whole year had passed. It was springtime, and it was the day to go to the palace. All of the children ran by carrying huge pots with beautiful flowers of all colors and shapes and sizes. One of Ping's smart friends ran by, said, "Ping, you couldn't grow a big flower like mine? You're not going to go to the emperor with an empty pot, are you? King said, I've grown many flowers, bigger and prettier than that. It's just this seed. It won't grow. Ping's father overheard and came over to Ping, put his arm around him and said, you've tended this seed. You've looked after it. You've done your best, and your best needs to be good enough for the emperor. And with that, Ping put on his best clothes and headed to the palace with his empty pot. When he got there, air was filled with perfume, and there were flowers of all types there, and the emperor was standing looking out over all of the beauty. But the emperor was frowning. Finally, after going to each child, the emperor came to Ping. Why have you brought me an empty pot? He said. Ping hung his head and started to cry. I tried, I really did. I put the seed in a pot and I put good soil in and I watered it and I tended it. And then I changed it to a different pot, a bigger pot with better soil, and I watered it and I tended it all year long, but I couldn't get it to grow. This was the best I could do. And so I had to bring you this. It was the best I could do. Slowly, a smile spread across the emperor's face as he placed his arm around Ping's shoulder. As he looked over the crowd, he said, I don't know where the rest of you got your seeds from, because all the seeds that I gave you were cooked, and so they would not grow. But here, I have found him. I have found my successor to the throne, the one person courageous enough to tell the truth. And for that, I reward you, Ping, with my kingdom and the title of emperor. And that story is The Empty Pot by Demi. You see, Ping thought he had lost his green thumb, but really, he had not only not lost his green thumb, but he had found and strengthened his honesty and integrity. And for that, he was rewarded. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was just so nice and so nicely told. Thank you for sharing that. Our next storyteller coming up is Robin Reichert. And Robin is just a wonderful soul who shares parts of herself through the stories that she tells. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Robin Reichert.
Thank you, Denise. Good to be here. I'm loving all these wonderful stories. The front door of the store where I worked swung open and a young man entered. He glanced around at the sand paintings, the jewelry, the drums and rattles. He looked at the artwork on the walls, and I saw that his long hair and chiseled features were mirrored in that artwork. He made a beeline for the counter where I stood. Hi, my name is Eric. Is Lisa here? Oh, I'm sorry, no. She'll be here day after tomorrow. Is there anything I can do to help? No. Well, maybe. And Eric started to pour out his story. I live in a big house with 7 other people, a couple of guys and a couple of girls. And well, I've got to get out of there. It's not a good place for me. You see, they drink a lot. They drink all the time, and sometimes they do drugs. I've been a part of that too, but I don't want to do it anymore. I've got to get out of there. I want to find my father. He's Apache. He lives out west. I think maybe if I get in touch with my roots, it'll help me. Eric went on for about 20 minutes, pouring out his heart, his story, every detail of what he was concerned about, his dreams and his hopes. And then all of a sudden, he stopped. Oh, I don't know why I'm sharing all this personal stuff with you. I don't normally do that. I'm so sorry. I don't know you. You don't know me. I'm so sorry. Oh, Eric, no. I'm honored that you're sharing this with me. Really. For a few moments, he was quiet. He turned and went over to a bookshelf nearby. He picked up a couple of books and thumbed through them. I walked over. Eric, have you ever been to a powwow? I've heard of them. I know what they are, but no, I've never been to one. Well, here, I reached down on a low shelf. We get this every year. It's a calendar. It tells you all the powwows in this area and the whole Northeast. There's a lot of them. He picked up the book and thumbed through that and set it aside. Meanwhile, I went and got a bowl full of sage and I lit it. Oh, smudge, right? To clear negative energy? Yeah. He reached his hands in over the smoke and pulled it over himself. And I did the same. We were quiet. And then it seemed our conversation had come to a close. I better go now. I really appreciate that you listened to me. I'll see you around. He turned on his heel to start leaving the store, and I remembered something. Eric, wait. I reached in my pocket and pulled out a little vial of red earth, sand really, that a friend had given me the week before. Eric, this comes from Chimayo. Have you ever heard of Chimayo in New Mexico? No. Well, about a week ago, a friend of mine shared this with me. Chimayo is known as a sacred site. It's a place where miracles happen. And it's said that if you bring back that earth and give it to someone, miracles will happen for them. And I'd like to share what my friend shared with me because I'm supposed to pass it on. Hold out your hand. Eric held out his hand and I held it. I tapped out a few grains of that earth and rubbed it into his palm, just as had been done for me, rubbing my finger in a circle. And I said, now you can receive the miracle too. Wow, thanks. That's so cool. Yeah, that's so cool. He closed his hand around that earth. Oh, thanks so much. I'm so glad I came in here. I really do have to go. I'll see you. Bye. And I watched as that young man passed back through the door and disappeared on to the busy street. And I thought, that might have been a son that I didn't have. Well, 1 year later, I'd never seen Eric again. I decided to go to a powwow, my favorite powwow. Why was it my favorite powwow? Well, it was the first one I'd ever gone to. It was an annual event, and so it was special to me. I got there early so I could walk around and see the crafters setting up and say hello. And I knew that in a few short moments, the grand entry would open the powwow. There were the scents of Indian fry bread, tacos, roasting corn, and sage. And in a short time, I heard the thump, thump, thump of the drums as the drummers were practicing. Then the MC stepped out and called everyone to the big dance arena, a big field that they were going to dance in a circle. By the time I got there, it was 10 deep, all around that whole dance ring. So I stood in the back watching as the MC introduced the grand entry. That's where the flag bearers came out with an American flag, a military flag, Native American flags, and a prisoner of war flag. They circled around slowly, proudly, several times. And then the MC announced it was time to invite the veterans. All veterans who have served in the military, who have served our country, come out and be honored now. Dance around the flag bearers. And I watched as several veterans from all different directions came out and danced with their heads held high behind those flag bearers. While all of this was going on, for some reason, I looked through that 10 deep of people. My eyes were transfixed. I kept returning to the back of this one head that was near the front of the dance ring. I didn't know why. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but I was distracted. The hair on the back of this head was long and black, and it's not unusual at a powwow to see a lot of long black hair. But I just couldn't take my eyes off this one head. Next, the MC said, "This is a very special dance coming up. Now we invite anyone who has quit drinking or doing drugs for a day, a week, months, or years to come out and be supported by everyone here. We invite you to come out and dance in a circle with everyone who's out there already." I watched as this one person who I was transfixed by stepped out into the dance ring, along with several others. At first, he was dancing away from me. I could see now that it was a man. And as he slowly moved around the circle to the beat of the drum, he got across the dance ring from me, and I could see his profile. It looked very familiar. And as he moved around and I saw him full in the face, it was Eric. Tears formed in my eyes and ran down my cheeks. It was Eric. How did this happen? I watched him straight and tall and proud, walking, dancing around that circle. And after he had had his dance, he stepped back into the crowd in the front by the dance ring. Well, I pushed through the crowd, calling his name, Eric, Eric. His head spun around. Eric, do you remember me? Yes, I remember you. How did you know I was here? This is my first powwow, my first sobriety dance. How did you know? Eric, I didn't know. We hugged each other and we talked, and we both agreed that some mysterious force had brought us back together on this momentous day to celebrate life and healing together on this good red earth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you for sharing that with all of us here. Before I have us continue on, I would like to mention that all of us are sitting in different places. Again, we have Suzanne in Canada. Each of the rest of us are in different states in the United States. And I just would like to say that Patchwork supports the Native American original peoples who had lived on this land as earth keepers. And we acknowledge not only that they had been here, but that they are still here today and are relevant in our lives and in trying to maintain the health of the world, the earth. And now I would like to introduce Rob Aptaker, who has been telling Native American stories, actually studying them and learning them from the cultures who have shared them with him. And now he is going to share one of those wonderful stories with us here today. So here is Rob Aptaker.
Good evening, everybody. Robin, thanks. It's been a while since I've seen a sobriety dance. It brought a little tear to my eye. The story I'm going to tell tonight comes from the Haudenosaunee people, the ones we more commonly know as the Iroquois. I heard this originally from a Mohawk woman who told it in Vermont, and I don't remember her name. It was so many years ago. But if you ever see her, she has braces on her legs. And at the end of this, I'll tell a little addendum, something that she did with that story. Joseph Bruchac also tells it. And there's a folk singer, an Adirondack folk singer, who learned this story from Ray Fadden, a very well-respected Mohawk elder, I believe no longer with us. And I love this story, The Boy Who Lived with Bears. Long ago, there was a boy, and a very unfortunate thing had happened. His mother and father had been traveling with him from one village to another. And that night they made the mistake of making their camp underneath a large dead tree. And there was strong wind that night. And the tree came down and the boy's parents died. Somehow he survived. Now it happened that the only living relative this boy had was an uncle. In the village where he lived, this uncle was renowned as the greatest hunter. You know, he could follow an animal track and he could identify the animal and say how long ago it had been there, even whether it had eaten that day. This man could follow a track so well. And his skill at making arrows was unsurpassed, and his marksmanship, his archery skills were so great that he always got the game that he hunted. But there was another reason that he was so good a hunter. This man had a little dog. And the Haudenosaunee people say that there's a dog, a little white dog with two black dots above the eyes. They call that a four-eyed dog because it almost looks like they have four eyes. And those dogs are highly prized among the Haudenosaunee, and they say they're the smartest dogs. And this one sure was, because when he got on the trail of an animal, he never gave up. And so the skill of that uncle, and that coupled with the power of that little white dog, he was always a successful hunter. And for that reason, he was highly respected. But you know, as good a hunter as he was, that's about how bad an uncle he was. Because like some people, he had forgotten what it was like to be a child himself. He was a man who was very good at things. And so when he got this little boy, 7, 8 years old, living with him, he had no patience. If the boy couldn't learn a thing quickly, if he tried to show him how to make an arrow point or how to shape something with tools, if the boy made a mistake or dropped it or scratched it in the wrong way, the uncle would become very impatient. He called the boy stupid. He called him lazy. He called him good for nothing. And this was not a lazy or good for nothing boy. This boy was trying his best, but you know, he needed somebody to be patient with him, to take some time to show him how to do these things. And the uncle couldn't do that. And this boy was sad because he wanted to learn the skills, the thing a boy would have to know to become a man, to be well respected among his people, to be able to provide for a family. And the uncle wasn't teaching him these things. He had given up on him. The boy was very sad. One day, though, the uncle surprised him. He said, "Boy, you want to learn to hunt?" "Yes, uncle, I should like that very much." Boy was really excited. He was finally going to learn the things he needed to know as a man. Uncle said, "Follow me then." The boy was surprised. You know, usually before Uncle went hunting, he would purify himself, sometimes take a sweat bath, sometimes rub himself with certain herbs and plants to put away the human smell. Uncle didn't do either of those things. And the uncle didn't bring that little dog with him, that dog that was such a good hunting dog. And when they walked into the forest, the uncle, who usually walked with a careful and quiet step when he hunted, he stepped in a normal way, crunching through the leaves. Boy was very puzzled. He wanted to ask his uncle, "Why aren't we purifying? Why aren't we bringing the hunting dog? Why aren't we being quiet?" But, you know, he was so glad to finally be invited to come hunt. He didn't want to anger his uncle and maybe be sent back to the village and not have this chance to learn this important thing. And so he followed along behind Uncle. Uncle didn't speak a word, walked deep into the forest, along a circuitous route. After a little while, it seemed to the boy that he couldn't really remember the way to get back to the village. But he was with Uncle, and maybe he was going to learn to hunt. And after a very long time, they came to a wall of stone with a hole at the bottom. And the uncle said, "Boy, you want to learn to hunt?" "Yes, Uncle, I would like that." "There's a bunch of animals in that cave," and he pointed to that hole. "I want you to go in there and chase them out, and I'll shoot them with my bow." Oh, that boy didn't want to go into that cave. But this was his chance to please his uncle and maybe learn the important skills of hunting. And so, as frightened as he was, the little boy got down on his hands and knees and he began to crawl into that cave. And at first it wasn't so bad because there was light coming in from behind him and he could kind of see as he was going. But as he got a little further into the cave, all of a sudden, the light behind him disappeared, as if someone had moved something large in front of that cave. Boy was in complete darkness. At the same time, he could feel from the air around him that he had come into an open space where he could actually stand up. The boy stood up inside that cave and his heart was beating so fast in his chest. And he was very, very frightened. But he remembered that his mother, when she was alive, had told him, "If you're ever afraid, sing a brave song." And so he sang. And at first, it didn't sound so much like singing. It sounded mostly like crying. It was a little bit like this. "Oh, yeah, oh, yeah, oh, yeah, oh." But as he sang, his voice got stronger. "Gai wani yo, hey ho, gai wani yo, we ya ho, ya ho, ya ho, gai wani yo, hey ho, gai wani yo." And by the time he had stopped singing, his heart had stopped pounding so fast, and he was calm. He was quiet for a moment, and then he began to hear around him voices. "Who is it?" "What's he doing here?" "It looks like a little boy, and he's all alone." The next thing he knew, the light appeared behind him again, and he realized he could find his way out. And when he crawled out of that cave, all around him in the clearing were animals. There was a deer, there was a bear, there was a beaver, there was a rabbit, there were birds, all manner of animals around him. "Who are you? what are you doing here? Where's your mom and dad? And they were asking him questions, and he explained, well, I was with my uncle, and he was to teach me to hunt, but I went in the cave, and suddenly it was dark, and, well, I don't know how to go back to where I live. The animal said, somebody's going to have to adopt this boy. Boy, choose somebody to be your parents. Well, the boy didn't know what to say. He said, thank you. I don't know very much about you. Maybe you could tell me about yourselves, and then I would know who I might live with. The first one that came forward was a bird. Boy, come live with us. We have a good life. We fly through the air. We eat berries. We eat seeds. It's a good life. Come with us and be a bird. And the boy, he had been taught by his mother when she was alive, always be very polite. He didn't say, that's ridiculous. I can't be a bird. Instead, the boy said, that sounds like a very good life indeed, but I have no wings. I don't think I could travel with you. Thank you anyway, though. The next one that came forward was the deer. Oh boy, come with us and be a deer. We have a good life. We run through the fields and the forest, and no one can catch us. We nibble the soft buds and the leaves. We have a good life. Come, be a deer. And the boy said, oh, that does sound like a good life, but you have 4 legs and I have only 2. I don't think I could keep up with you. Thank you anyway. I wouldn't want to slow you down. One by one, the animals came forward and offered themselves. Even the little mole comes up. He's tugging on the boy's leggings. Boy, come with me. Come be a mole. We have a good life. We dig holes under the ground. We eat worms and bugs. It's a good life. Come and be a mole. The little boy said, oh, it does sound like a good life, but I think my shoulders are probably too wide. I wouldn't be able to fit in the hole with you. I don't think I could be a mole. And for a while, it looked like nobody would adopt this boy. But finally, one animal had been waiting, and the reason she waited was she already had 2 cubs of her own. She wanted to see if anybody else could adopt this boy, but when no one else offered, the mother bear stepped forward. Boy, you come with us. Be a bear. We go slow through the forest. Find berries, find fish, find honey. It's a good life, huh? And the boy said, I think I would like that very much. And so it was that this little lost boy came to live with his mother bear and her 2 cubs. And it was a good life indeed. He suddenly had 2 brothers. And if you've ever seen bear cubs are always playing, they're always wrestling with each other. And pretty soon they were wrestling with this little boy. And a strange and miraculous and wondrous thing happened. They never meant to hurt, but they would scratch and, they would bite. You've seen like puppies do, only bigger. And everywhere that their claws would touch his skin or their teeth would touch him, thick black hair began to form. And so the longer he lived with these animals, the more he started to look like a bear and less he started to look like a human boy. And it was a good life. And they traveled through the forest. But even a bear cub has to learn things. And the mother bear was a great teacher. Whenever there's danger, mother bear, she gives a signal. She makes this sound. She goes, when you're a baby bear and you hear that, you hold really still and you wait for mama, because she might chase you up a tree, or she might have you hold still till the danger passes, or she might have you run. Then when everything's okay, mother bear, she makes a sound like this. She goes, and that means, okay, we're all right. And this little boy, he learned just like his cub brothers. He learned how to follow those instructions from his mom. One day they're walking through the woods and the mother stops. Baby bear, cubs, they all stop too. And they listen and they hear crunch, crunch, crunch. Mother bear goes, That's the one we call hunts with heavy feet. We have no danger. We know where he is. Come, children. And she led her cubs and they went away, and that hunter didn't find them. Another day, they're walking in the forest. Mother bear stops. Everybody stops and freezes. They hear, oh yeah, today's the day. Gonna have a good day hunting this time. Maybe get some squirrels, maybe get a big old deer. Oh yeah, it's gonna be a good day hunting. Mother bear goes, we don't have to worry about that one. He's the one we call talks when he hunts. we're safe. And she takes her little ones and they go off on their way. But one day, as they walked through the forest, Mother Bear stopped and they listened. They didn't hear anything, but also they did not hear the call of the birds. Mother Bear puts her nose up in the air and she says, "Children, that is the one we call hunts with 4 legs and 2, and he's the one we fear the most, because when that one takes a trail, he never stops. And so quick, run, it's all we can do." And she takes her cubs and she chases them ahead of her, and they run as far as they can. And a bear is a fast, fast animal, but they get out of breath after a bit. And that dog and that hunter, they were hunting steady. They just kept a pace, and pretty soon the bears couldn't run anymore, especially those little ones. Now they come to a big tree lying on its side, and this tree is hollow in the bottom, and it's so big that mother bear, she sends her 3 cubs, those 2 bear cubs and that little boy, into that hole, and she backs into that. She's going to stand between anybody's going to get to her cubs, going to have to kill her first, and she backs into that cave of a tree, and she waits. And pretty soon that dog comes. He's not even barking. That dog's quiet. He comes up and he points to where that cave is. And that hunter, he knows the bear's in that hollow tree, but he's smart. He doesn't want to go in after that mother bear. So he builds a fire right outside that tree, and he starts to throw some green on it, and then starts to wave that smoke in toward that hollow log. Now, mother bear, she'll fight to the death to save her young ones, but nobody can breathe smoke, and mother bear can't either. And so finally, when the smoke overcomes her, she comes out of that cave. The hunter draws back his bow. He's going to aim straight for her heart. He's going to make a good shot. And just about before he shoots, that little boy who was a bear comes out and he holds up his hand and he says, "Stop, don't shoot my mother." The hunter is amazed. This little bear is talking to him. He lowers his bow and he looks. And when he looks, he thinks he maybe recognizes this bear. And he takes his hands and he puts them on the face, that little bear. And when he pushes that hair aside, miraculously, the hair falls away. And he sees that it's a little boy. And he says, "Nephew, is it really you? Oh, I'm so glad to see you. I admit, I thought you were a burden. I thought you were a trouble, and I put you in that cave, and I left you there. But I went home that night, and my mind became straight for the first time, and I realized I had done a terrible thing, and I went back to find you. But when I got there, the stone was moved, and there were the footprints of so many animals, and you were gone, and I thought you had been devoured, and ever since then, I've been so angry with myself. Boy, if you would come home and live with me, I'd be a real uncle to you, and I'd take care of you, and I'd teach you the things you need to know." The little boy looked up and he said, "Uncle, I would like that, but I ask only one thing. You see these bears here?" And he pointed to that mother bear, and he pointed to those 2 cubs. "When you hunt, as you must do, you must promise me that you'll never hurt this bear here." And the uncle promised to that. And they went home, and his uncle was like a father to him. And that is the story of the boy who lived with bears. And before I wind it up, I'll tell you one more thing. The lady who told that story to me the first time, the Mohawk lady, said that she went to her elders and she asked them if she could add something to that story when she told it to children. She said she'd like to say to them, if you got somebody at home who doesn't understand what you need as a child and can't give you the love and the care that you need, see if you can find somebody who could be like a mother bear. Now, she told that story, and she told about going to a school and telling that story in that way. And afterward, she got a call from the librarian from that school who said to her, "You know that story you told about the boy who lived with bears? Well, next day, a little girl came up to me in the library and said, 'Can you be like a mother bear?'" So these stories are alive, and they feed us and they serve us. And it has been my honor tonight to share with you the story of the boy who lived with bears. I hope.
Thank you so much, Rob. I can't thank you enough for sharing that story with us and the relevance of it. Thank you. That was just beautiful. before I introduce our last storyteller, I'd like to ask the storytellers if when Karen Marr is our last storyteller, when she is finished, I'm going to switch the view to a gallery view. And I would like to just run down the names of each of you. And if you could just wave to those people who are watching and enjoying your story so much on the other platforms, I think that would be a very nice way to finish up tonight. And so now I will introduce to you Karen Marr. Karen Marr is a wonderful storyteller, a wonderful person. She's a retired librarian, amongst other things, an accordion player, and she partakes in various different organizations and activities where storytelling takes the forefront. And so now I would like to introduce to you Karen Marr.
Thank you very much. I feel honored that I'm the last storyteller because they always say you save the best for last. And honestly, after what I've heard this evening, that could not possibly be true. And my story is so silly. After all of these really heartrending and meaningful stories that I'm thinking maybe I should make something else up on the spot, but I'm not going to. This is a story of a lost prince. And there are a lot of lost prince stories out there. And this is a story by one of my favorite children's authors, and that is A.A. Milne. This is the story of Prince Rabbit. And if you've never read it, please do yourself a favor and read it, because A.A. Milne is one of the best humorists of his age. Once there was a king who had no children. None. He'd say to his wife sometimes, the queen, "If only you had had a son." "Yes, dear, if only I had had a son." And then when he was really in a bad mood, he would say, "You could have at least had a daughter. That would have been something." And she'd say, yes, a daughter would be a comfort. But years went by, and there were no children in the castle, and the people in the kingdom were beginning to get worried, because if there was no child in the castle, who was going to be the king when this king died? Well, they certainly didn't want the Lord Chancellor to be king because nobody liked him. And some people said there won't be any king. We'll just all be equal, which some people thought was a great idea and some people didn't. Speaking of the Lord Chancellor, he worried about this too. And so one day he went to the king and he said, "Your Majesty, I'd like to speak my mind. You see, there will come a day when you..." How is he going to put this? "Your Majesty, should you, we don't want you to die. No, we don't want you to die. We want you to stay forever. We think you're wonderful. But I'm just saying the possibility is there, and we have to think about the future." And the king said, "Are you trying to ask me who will be king after I die?" And the Lord Chancellor said, "Yes, Your Majesty." And the king said, "Well, I can tell you who won't be king after I die. So what do you suggest we do about it?" And they came up with an excellent plan. They were going to send out an announcement for all youths no older than 20 of good family to show up at the castle a week hence for a series of tests. And the first test was going to be a foot race. And so when the day came, there were a lot of people there to see what was going to happen. Now, they had to be young, they had to have good parents, and they had to want to be king. That's all. That was all the announcement said. And there were 9 young men there and 1 rabbit. So the Lord Chancellor was putting numbers on the shoulders of all the young men so that the crowd could tell who they were. And he kept pushing this rabbit away. And the rabbit finally stood up on his haunches and said, "Excuse me, I am one of the competitors. You do not kick the competitors. That's favoritism." And the Lord Chancellor said, "You can't be a competitor." "Oh, yes, I can. I am young. I'm a youth. I am not over 20 years old. I have an excellent pedigree, and I want to be king." Oh, that's when the Lord Chancellor realized he had forgotten a very important qualification in his announcement, but it was a little late. So he took all 10 contestants up to introduce them to the king and the queen, and he had said, "Lord so-and-so and Lord so-and-so and Lord so-and-so and the son of Duke so-and-so, and here is Rabbit." And the rabbit said, "Lord Rabbit." "Rabbit," said the king, "why is he in this race?" "His qualifications are valid, Your Majesty." And so the race began. Well, by the end of the race, everyone was cheering for the second place person, who was Lord Calomel. And so was the rabbit, because he had gotten back to the start of the race long before Lord Calomel managed to puff in. And that is when the king said to the Lord Chancellor, "All right, now what do we do?" And the Lord Chancellor just shrugged, and the king said, "All right, our next test will be sword fighting. And it's going to happen right now." "Well, because the rabbit said, well, I need a day or 2 to practice, Your Majesty." "Oh, no," said the king, "it's going to happen today. There will be a sword fighting contest." "Oh, but Your Majesty, but don't you think Lord Calomel should have a little time to catch his breath?" And so they waited an hour, and the Lord Chancellor brought the rabbit a little sword, which he put in his mouth because, Lord Calomel looked so princely out there with his shining blade. And as he pulled the blade from his scabbard, he went after that rabbit. But the rabbit, holding the sword in his mouth, ran between Lord Calomel's legs, squished around him, quick as a bunny, which he was. And Lord Calomel fell and hit the ground, cracking his right arm. But he stood up bravely and picked up the sword with the left arm, and everyone cheered, including the rabbit, who had put down the sword, his little sword, long enough to clap his little paws. And then he picked up the sword again, and Lord Calomel went after him with his right hand. But the rabbit dodged, the rabbit swerved, the rabbit hopped, and down went Lord Calomel again, and this time he sprained his ankle. Well, they had to stop the contest right then, but they decided they would meet again in a week for an intellectual contest. And the king and the Lord Chancellor and the queen got together to decide what this should be. And the king said, "Well, there was this riddle me ree that my father would always say. I think we should ask them this riddle." And this riddle is so complicated, I actually have it right here. And if I can't remember it, please excuse me, I might have to read it. But you'll know right away what the answer is. "My first I do for your delight, although it's neither black nor white. My second looks the other way and always goes to bed by day. My whole can fly and climb a tree, and sometimes swims upon the sea." Everybody knows what that is, right? Well, the queen didn't know, and she said to the king, well, what's the answer? And the king said, I'm not sure. It's either dormouse or raspberry. And the queen said, well, that doesn't make any sense, dormouse or raspberry. He says, well, I think it's dormouse. And then the queen said, well, how are you going to be sure that Lord Calomel is going to know the answer? Because neither of them make very much sense. He says, well, I'm going to put the answer in the riddle that I send to him. Can you do that? Said the queen. Of course, I'm king. I can do anything. And that's exactly what he did. He sent the riddle to the rabbit, and he sent the riddle to Lord Calomel. And in Lord Calomel's, it said, from a friend, the answer is dormouse. Burn this. Well, the day came, and he recited that riddle. And really, I don't know what the answer to the riddle is. I don't think there is an answer. And Lord Calomel, and he said, now the secretary will write down your answer, and the Lord Chancellor has the answer in this piece of paper. And Lord Calomel said, well, this was a poser, but I believe the answer is dormouse. And the secretary wrote it down. And then the rabbit looked up. He looked up very, very shyly and humbly, and he said, well, I really do respect Lord Calomel's intellect, but the answer could not possibly be woodlouse. As Lord Calomel said, it must be dormouse. I said dormouse, said Lord Calomel. And the secretary read, Lord Calomel, dormouse. And then the chancellor opened it, and the answer was dormouse. And the rabbit said, well, then we're both right. I was sure you said woodlouse. Now what do? Said the king. Ask them an arithmetic question, said the Lord Chancellor, like 6 times 7. And when the king looked confused, the Lord Chancellor whispered, 42. Oh, all right, what's 6 times 7, Lord Calomel? And Lord Calomel, obviously no one in this kingdom took multiplication tables, said 54. 54. Well, now, you know, the rabbit had a problem. If he gave the correct answer, which is 42, the king might decide to say 54 was the answer. And so the rabbit decided to play both sides. He said, now in an old-fashioned kingdom, with outdated arithmetic rules, the answer would be 42, but this is a new, forward-thinking, independent nation, in which case I believe that we will say the answer is 54, unless, Your Majesty, you prefer the old way, and then the answer would be 42. Well, the king, what was he going to do? And then he had a stroke of genius. He said, you know, a king must often stand for long periods of time in front of people giving speeches. So our next test will be a test on who can stand on 2 feet for the longest amount of time. But we're going to wait a few weeks until Lord Calomel, until his ankle gets better. Well, now the rabbit couldn't prevaricate his way through this. So he went into the forest where he had been brought up by a very fine family of rabbits. And there was a magician who lived in the forest. Who was a wonderful magician. Oh my gosh, he could cook a plum pudding in his hat. Yeah, and he could pull streamers out of his mouth for the longest time. He was a wonderful magician. So the rabbit went to the magician and he said, now, can you turn a rabbit into a man? And the magician said, well, I can turn a plum pudding into a rabbit. He said, I can turn anything into a rabbit. I like turning things into a rabbit. Can you turn a man into a rabbit? Well, I did that once, said the magician. It was about 18 years ago. I was entertaining at King Nicodemus's son's christening, and I asked to borrow a baby, and they handed up a baby. I didn't know it was the prince. I put my red handkerchief over, zoopity doopity, there was a baby rabbit. Cutest little thing, but no matter what I did, I couldn't turn it back into a baby. Now, the king was very understanding about it. He told me never to cross the threshold of his castle again, and he said that I could keep the rabbit. But the queen, she didn't understand. It was a cute little rabbit. I had it for about a month, and then it escaped. Oh, said the rabbit. Well, that's all very sad, and you know, it's very sad. But I have a favor to ask of you. Well, when it was time for the standing on two legs competition, oh, the arena was filled. And the king looked all over for Lord Calomel, but all he could see were rabbit and another rabbit. And the Lord Chancellor said to Rabbit, "Why did you bring your brother?" "I'm not his brother," said the other rabbit. "I'm Lord Calomel." And the king said, "Oh, well, the Lord Chancellor thought he said go, and so he said go, and Rabbit, who had been practicing for a whole month to stand on his hind legs, jumped up, straight up, and Lord Calomel could only stay in a hind leg position for a couple of seconds, only a couple of seconds. And finally, Rabbit said, "Well, did I win? Did I win? Can I get down now? Can I get down now?" "Now, what are we going to do?" said the king. And finally he said, "Can I get down one?" And the king said, "Well, who won?" And the Lord Chancellor said, "The rabbit did." He goes, "Which rabbit?" And our friend the rabbit said, "The one with the two white spots behind his ears." And when he said that, the magician came pushing through the crowd and said, let me see those white spots." And he picked up the rabbit by the self-same ears and looked and put the rabbit down and said, "This is not a rabbit. This is King Nicodemus's lost son, Prince Silvio." The rabbit drew himself up and said, "I'm offended that no one has recognized me." And then the magician told the sad story about turning the prince into a baby rabbit. And it was very sad, and the queen was crying, and the king was harrumping, and Lord Calomel just looked like he was going to start biting people. And then all of a sudden the magician said, "Oh my gosh, I just remembered the famous words." He pulled out his red handkerchief. He put it over Rabbit, Prince Silvio Rabbit, not the other rabbit. He said, "Hey, presto!" And that red handkerchief got rose, and it rose, and it rose, and it rose, until finally there was a handsome, very handsome man standing there, Prince Silvio, who took the red handkerchief and held it in a strategic area, and everybody was very happy. And the king said, "Well, Prince Silvio is going to be my successor." And Prince Silvio said, "I'm overcome. May I borrow your handkerchief for a couple of days?" And the next day they had a ceremony declaring Prince Silvio the king's successor. And it was only when all the papers had been signed that Prince Silvio gave the red silk handkerchief back to the magician, who then used it to turn Lord Calomel back into a man. And Lord Calomel said, "Thanks a lot." The prince lived there for many years with the king and the queen. He got married to a beautiful princess. They had a son. They had a christening party. They did not invite the magician. And that is the story of Prince Rabbit, who was lost and then he was found.
What a wonderful way to end the storytelling night. You know, someone once said, especially when you're dealing with students, that you should never say that the work is wonderful, only thank you. But when it comes to storytelling and having had the pleasure of listening to everyone tonight, how can you not say that everyone just did such a wonderful job with their telling? So now I am going to put on the gallery view, which hopefully will show up on the other devices that are all going now at the same time. And you just get ready to wave. You can use a royal wave or a big, flappy wave, however you would like to do it, or a smooch, or even tug your ear if you want to pretend that you're a very famous comedic actress. All right, so I am going to shout out your name with the order that I see you up on my screen. So thank you to Jim Cassane. Thank you to Robin Reichert. Thank you to Patricia Coffey. Thank you to Lisbeth Pulowski. Thank you to Rob Aptaker. Thank you to Bill Carr. Thank you to Suzanne Butchell. Thank you to Karen Marr. And last but certainly not least, thank you to Larry Johnson. Thank you, Larry, for joining us tonight. It was great to have you here and to get some of that background on World Storytelling Day. I hope that we all get a chance to do this again next year. Our technical experiment seems to be a huge success, and I will share the video with you once it processes and maybe edit it up, and hopefully we'll be able to do a little encore. Thank you all so much. You have all been delightful. Thank you to everyone who has joined us for this wonderful storytelling event out there in the audience. Let me give a shout out to Ingrid Bond, who was giving a nice bunch of support there for a while in the chat. And without further ado, I say good night to our audience. And I ask everybody else to stay on for just a moment.